is a piece of gold ore that I detected from Bendigo, and I want to talk to you about how these pieces of gold ore can confuse prospectors when it comes to reading gold from a creek. That right there is a piece of reef gold. Can you see how sharp and prickly the edges are? There's nothing folded over, there's no smooth edges. It is completely as it was formed in the rock. I ended up getting this piece out by melting the quartz off it with caustic soda. Just for reference, this is another piece that I use the same method with caustic soda to melt away all the quartz. You can see just how sharp and delicate that piece of gold is. It wouldn't take very much to bend any of those edges over. And the reason for that is because it is super soft and malleable. Literally just it breaking out of the load vein on the hill and traveling a few feet, a few centimeters through the dirt will be enough to roll those edges over. By the time it gets to water, it's incredibly smooth. This here is an example of an alluvial nugget. That's spelt with an A. It means it is basically carried by water. So alluvial means waterborne. Alluvial, which is an E, is carried by the earth. And then there is hard rock lode deposits, which are pieces of gold locked up in their host rock that haven't moved at all. Look at the difference in a water-worn nugget. See how all those little holes have gold sort of wrapped around them? Those little holes are formed when pieces of gold like this are squished. So if we squish the crap out of that with a hammer or something, it'd end up eventually looking something like that. In general, if you find sharp gold, it means that you could be very close to a piece of ore, not the ore body. Let me explain. Way off in the mountains somewhere, this is a piece of ore that is pushed up through the crust, and then it sits there until eventually erosion through wind and rain gets to it, and it breaks up and it starts tumbling down the mountain. As that piece of ore tumbles down the mountain, the rock gets eroded more and more. So sort of like this is some ore that I've crushed up with a machine, but the same thing happens literally in nature. So it becomes smaller and smaller, and eventually what happens is the gold pops out of it. Now sometimes when the gold pops out of the piece of ore, so remember the rock starts like this and then it gets worn down like this, sometimes the piece of gold's attached to the rock. Sometimes the gold just pops right off the rock because again it's soft. Any gold that's traveled just a few feet from its ore body will start to look like this quite rapidly, regardless whether or not it's attached to the piece of quartz or if it's free like this. But occasionally you will find a very sharp piece of gold like this in a creek. And some people think that because you find a sharp piece of gold like this in the creek, it means you're close to the source. But in all likelihood, you're nowhere near it. Most of the sources you can tell when you get really close because your specimen count will go up. So you'll end up finding a lot more specimens, in other words, pieces of gold attached to quartz. And some of them will still be sharp, but like the abundance of them will be a lot more than what you'll find in the creek. If you find a specimen in the creek that's sharp, what's happened more than likely is a piece of ore like this has been traveling down that system for some time, and it just got broken in such a way where you were digging that you're able to recover the piece of reef gold. So just imagine, this has tumbled down the mountain and it spent the last 10,000 years working its way into the waterway, and as it tumbles down the creek, it gets locked because it's got gold in it and other minerals, it's heavy, it gets locked up on an inside bend or in a crevice somewhere, and then you dig it out. The digging out of quartz and dirt from creeks is quite a violent process, and it can damage things that have been traveling for a while, such as reef gold or reef pieces. So this is a piece of reef, it's not reef itself, it's no longer anywhere near where it originated from up in the mountains. And when you damage it or when you break the piece of quartz from getting it out of the ground, more often than not what happens is you release that piece of reef gold, so they're incredibly sharp and they're incredibly bright. And the only way a piece of reef gold could be in a creek like that on its own as a singular piece is because a piece of ore has been traveling down that creek system. One of the other ways you can tell is the color. Look at the difference in color between this and that. This has a different texture because it's been rolling around in a creek for a long time, whereas this has come straight out of the rock. This is much brighter than this piece. So to cut a long story short, just because you find a sharp piece of gold in a creek or you find a piece that's attached to quartz doesn't mean you're anywhere near the lode mine. And getting that terminology, I think, is incredibly correct, is incredibly important, because it's going to help other people in the future identify whether or not they should be looking up on the banks or if they should be continuing up the stream. In more cases than I can poke a stick at, and I found a few lode bodies now, is that most of the reef gold you find in a creek is just from ore tumbling down the system. Hope that helps. Hope that gives you some perspective. And until next time, bye.